Good morning, everyone. Happy Monday to you. It is 10 o'clock. It's time for 10 with Tim. My name is Tim Harris, and I appreciate so much the opportunity that we have every day to dig into God's Word together. I love God's Word. I love this for myself, for my own spiritual life, but I love the fact that we do this together. You make me better. You make me dig deeper. You make me wrestle with the text a little bit longer, and then you make me try to put into words what I feel like the Lord is teaching me. So thank you so much. Thank you so much for your faithfulness to this time together in God's Word. Today we're in Matthew chapter 8, verses 18 to 34. Remember, we're going verse by verse through the Gospel of Matthew. Matthew's sort of dividing things up in these triplets, these sections of three. We just finished last Friday 3 healings, and today a whole new section sort of related to the power of Jesus and the what it means to follow him. In verse 18, we start right there. Jesus is kind of now in this context between the crowds and the disciples. There are those who truly follow him, who are becoming more fully committed to him, and then those who continue to be more fans, more hangers on than actual disciples. And Jesus has 2 encounters here with would-be disciples. The first one was a teacher of religious law. Matthew, the way he phrases this, it implies that he's actually some kind of disciple. One of them, another one of them, a teacher of the law. So this is someone who, at least at this moment in his life, is on the fringes. He's kind of following Jesus. He's intrigued by Jesus. And he says, "Teacher, I will follow you anywhere." Yeah, isn't that interesting? Because it sounds like he just got saved, right? I mean, it sounds like this is going to be a fully devoted follower of Jesus. But Jesus replied, really interesting, "Foxes have holes, birds have nests, but the Son of Man has no place to lay his head." There is that sense in which Jesus is pressing this man to count the cost of discipleship. There's this interesting tension between this man's word, anywhere, I'll follow you anywhere. And then Jesus says, yeah, but I've got nowhere. It's that interesting kind of play there. And the assumption that this man might eventually fall back from following Jesus because it's not going to be comfortable. You were thinking anywhere, and Jesus says, I got nowhere, not even to lay my head. And so you need to know that before you get all excited about following me. You need to understand where this path leads. In the same way, another one of the disciples, again, someone who at this point is sort of on the path, sort of following Jesus, says, hey, Jesus, I need a couple of days off to go home and bury my father. Now, in the ancient world, like today, but more so than today, in the ancient world, to bury one's parents was a paramount obligation. And truly, everything stopped in order for one to fulfill that obligation. So in that sense, it would be the highest priority here. But Jesus questions even the highest priority by saying, you need to follow me now. Let the dead bury the dead. You need to follow me now. I was like, what? Jesus, don't you understand? It's my dad, only human. But again, at this point, Jesus is really pressing those who would follow him to understand the cost, what you're going to give up. You're going to have to radically reorder your priorities, and you're going to have to radically release your attachment to being comfortable. You see that? Now, the next story seems like what? Because it's the Jesus calms the storm story that you know so well. But it seems like it doesn't fit, except for the way, again, Matthew phrases this. And I don't want you to miss that. New Living Translation, verse 23. New Living Translation says Jesus got in the boat and started across the lake with his disciples. But what Matthew says is, and so the disciples followed Jesus into the boat. All right. So what's that idea of following? Matthew has tied these 2 episodes together on this theme of following. So understand what's about to happen with Jesus and the disciples with the boat. This is like an analogy. It's an illustration. It's a living picture of what happens when you follow Jesus. And it's really pretty amazing. So the disciples follow Jesus, right? Right into the boat. And then what happens? Suddenly, a fierce storm strikes the lake with waves breaking into the boat, and Jesus is asleep. And so the disciples are losing their mind. They wake him up shouting, Lord, save us. Lord, save us. Okay, what in the world is this about? Jesus responds, why are you afraid? You have so little faith. Gets up and rebukes the wind and the waves. Okay, first off, this story clearly is intended to illustrate Jesus's power over nature. Now, on the one hand, he just said he has less actual shelter than a bird. Like the birds and the foxes, the wild animals in nature, they a little bit better off than Jesus because they at least have nests and dens to sleep in. Jesus has got nothing. So in that sense, he puts himself somewhere, beneath birds and foxes in terms of comfort. But at the same time, this story represents Jesus's total mastery over nature. His complete authority over creation. And that's amazing. And Matthew wouldn't want you to miss that. But Matthew also wouldn't want you to miss the very fact that the disciples followed Jesus into this boat. So this story is sort of an illustration of what happens when you follow Jesus. Well, what's that going to look like? Well, it's going to look a whole lot like being in a boat in a storm with Jesus asleep. Okay, and that's frustrating, right? It's like, why is Jesus asleep? In the middle of my storm, why is Jesus asleep? Eyes closed. Is he even listening to my prayer? Does he even know that I'm about to drown? Why is he asleep in my storm? Well, can I just tell you, Jesus does not share your fear of storms. He does not share your fear of storms. Understand that. The disciples are with Jesus. Now, this storm may crush this boat, you understand? But these disciples are safe in his arms. They are sheltered in his arms. He's going to take care of them. They must trust him. But understand, fear chases out faith. Now, on the same hand, faith chases out fear. But the point is, fear chases faith, faith chases fear, but fear and faith don't live together very well in the same heart. And so the fear of the disciples is driving out their faith, but if they would develop faith, it would chase out their fear. You understand? But you sort of can't have both faith and fear. Interesting, right? So Jesus doesn't share their fear of storms. I love how Jesus wakes up and says, why are you afraid? Why are you afraid? And then he just calms the waves. I love that. It's interesting. Jesus doesn't rebuke the disciples because they have disturbed him with their prayer, disturbed him with their cries, right? Instead, Jesus rebukes the disciples because they disturb themselves with their own fear. Do you see that? Did I just say that right? Jesus doesn't rebuke them because they've disturbed him with their cries. Rebukes them because they have disturbed themselves with their own fear. I just think that's amazing. Now, the next story, you're probably thinking, what? Because you've heard this story elsewhere where there was one Gerasene demoniac, this one demon-possessed man. Matthew seems to have independent knowledge that there was another one. That doesn't bother me. It doesn't bother me. When the other gospel writers tell the story and they focus on the one-man legion, that doesn't bother me if there were two. I might say, hey, I saw Jack Wright in town yesterday. Manisa was with them. I didn't mention Manisa, but, it's that sort of thing. That this doesn't contradict the account that the other, gospel writers give us. Matthew just perhaps has independent knowledge that there actually were two. Okay, so there are two demon-possessed men who live here among the tombs, among the region of the Gadarenes. And I always love this story. I know that you're thinking, well, this story is disturbing to us because for the most part, we have this real, kind of fear of evil and the demons. And some of us are especially afraid of that idea of being possessed. And it's like, how did they become possessed? Well, I think every person controls the door to their own heart. And so these men, one way or the other, they open themselves to evil. And if you think, how does a person get taken over by a legion of demons. Well, I would say one demon at a time. You know, they didn't get this way overnight. And the pitiable state of their souls is something that moves Jesus to compassion. Do you see that? So in the same way that Matthew wants to depict Jesus as having this authority, this power over creation to calm the storm, the chaos of the sea, you see, in this instance, Jesus has that same authority over the chaos of the demon world, over the, anti-divine, powers of evil. And Matthew wants you to see that. I think there's a parallel there for him. It's interesting how Jesus has this incredible authority. All he has to do is just say, go, and the demons have to leave. It's like, your cat's in your chair, you're like, hey, scat, and the animal flees, the ancient exorcists, the ancient Jewish exorcists in the ancient world, man, exorcists put on a show. They have magic and rituals. And I mean, the Jewish exorcists, man, it's like a David Copperfield performance. They made this an elaborate show. Jesus doesn't make it a show. It's just like, hey, get, and the demons flee into the pigs. I'm assuming that most of that story. The startling part of the story for me is at the end when the people, they meet Jesus, but then they're like, hey, could you just leave? If you wouldn't mind, would you just leave? Now, there's no joy. First off, no joy over the deliverance of these two men. Like they've seen, their naked rear ends in the in the cemetery for all their lives. And there's no wonder, no joy at the fact that these men can now return to their families whole and at peace. No joy for that. For that matter, they haven't been able to walk, that side of the street for years because, those crazy naked men will come out, and scare you to death. And there's no joy. There's none of that for these people. That they instead just asked Jesus to go. Interesting response, but I guess it goes back to sort of the theme here that Jesus is going to test your expectations. Jesus is going to demand something of you if you are going to have him in your company, if you are going to follow him. He's not going to share your attachment to comfort. He's not going to share your priorities. He's not going to share your fear of storms, you understand? And he's not going to share your preference to keep things as they are. You get the idea that these people among the Gadarenes, they sort of liked having their two demon-possessed wackos running around naked, and they sort of enjoyed things as they were, and Jesus has now messed up things as they were, and they would prefer that he just leave, and maybe they can get things back to the way things were. Isn't it amazing how some people would rather have bondage than freedom, than deliverance? So when people say they're going to follow Jesus, Jesus always had this habit of just trying to make sure they knew what they were getting into. You need to know. You need to know that you may follow Jesus right into the boat that takes you right into the storm. Jesus may come and shake up everything as you've always known it. You need to understand that to follow Jesus is to embrace a whole new way of being in the world. I've gone way over time today. I will see you in the morning, Tuesday morning at 10 o'clock for 10 with Tim. We'll start in chapter 9, verses 1 to 13. Have a happy Monday. Enjoy this beautiful day God has given you. Stay in the Word, and I'll see you in the morning, 10 o'clock for 10 with Tim. I love you guys.